The night before deployment, I stood in our kitchen with my boots already by the door. The smell of coffee burned into the walls, and her hands resting on my chest like anchors. She cried quietly, the kind of crying meant to be brave, and promised me the house would stay exactly as I left it, that nothing would change, that love like ours didn't shift just because distance tried to test it. I believed her because belief is easier than doubt when you're wearing a uniform, and the world keeps telling you that sacrifice means something. I kissed the doorframe the way my father taught me, kissed her forehead, and walked out thinking I was leaving behind a life paused, waiting for my return. On the transport plane, I stared at the metal floor and imagined our living room untouched, the couch still sagging on my side, the framed photo of our wedding still crooked above the mantel, the plant I always forgot to water still alive because she remembered. I told myself that service was a straight line, that loyalty traveled both ways, that while I guarded borders and followed orders, my home was guarded by vows stronger than fear. Deployment strips time into pieces. Days blur into watches and nights stretch thin with silence broken by distant noise. In those early weeks, I wrote to her every chance I got, short messages at first, then longer ones when the internet held long enough. She replied with updates about mundane things, the sink leaking again, the neighbor's dog barking, a new grocery store opening down the road. I loved those details because they made the distance feel survivable. I told the guys about her laugh, about how she hated mornings but always made me breakfast anyway. They told me stories too, about wives and girlfriends and plans waiting at home, and we held those stories like talismans. When mail came late or messages lagged, I blamed the connection, the time zones, the chaos of a place that wasn't built for patience. I never blamed her, not once. It was 3 months in when the tone changed, not dramatically, just enough to register like a wrong note in a familiar song. Her messages grew shorter. Replies came hours later than days. She said she was tired, stressed, busy with work. I told her I understood because understanding is what you do when you're far away and powerless. I sent photos of sunsets bleeding orange over sand, of my bunk with my name taped above it, of the ridiculous coffee we drank to stay awake. She reacted with hearts and brief words. I noticed she stopped asking when I'd call. I noticed she didn't ask if I was safe. I noticed and told myself not to notice. Out there, you learn to ignore instincts when they don't come with proof. The first crack came through a voice not meant for me. I was on a borrowed phone during a rare long call when I heard laughter behind her, a male laugh, close, unfiltered, comfortable. She said it was the TV. I believed her because believing was easier than imagining another man sitting where I should be, breathing the air of my house, touching the light switches I installed. I joked it off and told her I had to go. After I hung up, I stared at the wall until the minutes dissolved. That night, I dreamed of my front door opening and not recognizing the shoes by the mat. I asked my sister to check on the house under the excuse of dropping off mail. She said everything looked fine, maybe a little messy, that my wife seemed distracted but okay. Relief washed through me so hard it hurt. I apologized to myself for doubting. I doubled down on faith, on duty, on the idea that distance could not invent betrayal. Weeks passed. The war did what wars do. We lost a man. We carried his weight in silence. I wrote to my wife about the funeral arrangements, about how fragile everything felt. She replied with a single sentence telling me to stay safe. No question marks, no warmth. I folded the message into my pocket like a warning I refused to read. The message that changed everything arrived without drama. It was from a neighbor I barely knew, a man who had borrowed my ladder once and never returned it. He wrote awkwardly, apologetically, said he didn't want to cause trouble but felt wrong staying quiet. He said there was a man staying at my house. He said he saw him there often, mornings and nights, parking in my driveway, carrying groceries inside. He said he assumed I knew. I read it 3 times before my hands started shaking. I asked for details. He sent a photo taken from across the street, my front porch unmistakable, my door open, my wife standing barefoot in the doorway, a man behind her with his hand on the frame like he belonged there. The time stamp was from the week before. The world narrowed to a point. I remember standing up too fast, the room spinning, my heart pounding like it wanted out. I called her. It rang until it went to voicemail. I called again. No answer. I texted. Nothing. Around me, life went on. Orders were shouted. A vehicle backfired. Someone laughed. I stepped outside and breathed dust and heat and tried not to scream. When she finally replied hours later, she said we needed to talk. Those words have weight. They fell on me like a verdict. I asked her who he was. She said a friend. I asked why he was in our house. She said she was lonely. I asked how long. She said it didn't matter. I asked if she loved him. She didn't answer. We talked the next day with the connection cutting in and out, her face pixelated, my own reflection staring back at me from the screen like a stranger. She told me she hadn't planned it, that it just happened, that she needed support and someone to be there. She said the house felt empty without me. She said she didn't think it would hurt me this much. I told her I was still there, that I had been there every day in my head, that I had risked my life with her name in my mouth. She cried. I didn't. I felt hollow, like something essential had been removed without anesthesia. When I asked her to ask him to leave, she hesitated. That hesitation said more than any confession. She said she needed time. I told her time was the one thing I didn't have. The days that followed were worse than any firefight. Betrayal doesn't come with adrenaline. It comes with quiet moments when your mind loops images you never wanted. I imagined him sleeping in my bed, wearing my robe, using my mug. I imagined her laugh changing shape around him. I imagined the house adjusting to his presence like it had rejected mine. I stopped eating. The guys noticed. One of them put a hand on my shoulder and told me I wasn't alone. I nodded and felt more alone than ever. I filed paperwork to request emergency leave. It was denied. Mission needs. Chain of command. I signed where they told me and went back to my bunk and stared at the ceiling until dawn. She stopped responding altogether. Through my sister, I learned she had told people we were separated. Through my neighbor, I learned the man's name. Through social media, I learned he had posted a photo from my backyard grill, beer in hand, captioned with a joke about finally feeling at home. I reported it. It was taken down. The damage was, I started sleeping with my boots on. I started writing letters I never sent. I started understanding how trust can be dismantled one ordinary choice at a time. When the call finally came that I was being rotated home early for unrelated reasons, I felt no relief. I felt dread. The flight back was quieter than the one out, filled with men clutching duffels and private thoughts. I rehearsed conversations I wouldn't get to have. I imagined doors closed in my face. I imagined apologies that came too late. When the plane touched down, the ground felt unstable. My sister picked me up. She tried to talk. I watched the road. As we turned onto my street, I saw a car I didn't recognize in my driveway. My hands clenched. My sister slowed and asked if I wanted her to stay. I said no. I said I needed to do this alone. The front door was unlocked. That detail cut deepest. Inside, the house smelled different, a new cologne layered over familiar soap, shoes by the door that weren't mine, a jacket on the chair. In the living room, my wedding photo was gone. In its place was a framed print I'd never seen. I walked room to room like an intruder. In the bedroom, my side of the closet was empty. My clothes boxed and stacked against the wall like an afterthought. On the nightstand was a phone charging that wasn't hers. I heard movement behind me and turned. He stood there, taller than me, younger, wearing a shirt I recognized because I'd bought it for her last Christmas. He said my name like he owned it. He said he didn't expect me yet. He said he was sorry that feelings happened, that no one meant for it to go this far. I didn't hit him. I didn't shout. I asked where my wife was. He said out. I told him to leave. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I stepped closer and repeated myself. He left with a bag and a look that said he thought he was the victim. I locked the door behind him and sat on the floor until my wife came home. When she did, she froze. She said my name like a question. She said she hadn't known I'd be back so soon. She said we needed to talk. I told her I had talked enough. I told her she had moved another man into our home while I served my country. I told her that choice had a weight she couldn't lift with excuses. She cried and said she felt abandoned. I laughed then, a sharp sound that surprised us both. I told her abandonment was something you did, not something you felt. I told her she had rewritten our marriage without my consent. She asked if we could try counseling. I asked her if she would have asked him to leave if I hadn't come home. She didn't answer. That night I slept on the couch, the sag on my side replaced by someone else's imprint. In the morning I packed the rest of my things. She watched silently. She asked if I hated her. I said hate takes energy I didn't have. I said I felt grief. I said I felt foolish. I said I felt done. I left my ring on the counter. I took the plant. Outside, the air felt cleaner. My sister's house was small but quiet. I sat at her table and drank coffee that tasted like ash, and tried to figure out who I was without the story I had carried across oceans. Word spread faster than I wanted. Some people took sides. Some said I should have been more present. Some said distance kills marriages. I stopped listening. I focused on getting through days. I filed for divorce. She contested. It dragged on. She asked for the house. I asked for fairness. The judge listened to dates and facts and decided what could be decided. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment with white walls and a view of a parking lot. I learned to cook for one. I learned that silence can be kind. Months later, I ran into the man at a grocery store. He avoided my eyes. I felt nothing. That surprised me. What I felt was a strange clarity, a line drawn clean through my life separating before and after. I realized service had taught me how to endure, but betrayal taught me how to choose myself. I began to rebuild slowly, deliberately, without the rush of promises. I reached out to friends I had neglected. I took long walks. I slept without boots by the door. One evening, a letter arrived forwarded from my old address. It was from her. She wrote about regret, about realizing too late what she had broken, about missing the man who came home tired and still tried. I read it once and placed it in a drawer. Closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's a decision. I went to the window and watched the sun set over concrete and thought about how service asks for everything but rarely prepares you for what you might lose at home. I thought about loyalty and how it isn't proven by words spoken when it's easy, but by choices made when no one is watching. I thought about the house I had imagined untouched and how reality had rewritten it. And I knew that while I had served my country, the hardest duty ahead was serving myself with the same discipline, the same honor, and a promise I would keep. The first months after moving into my new apartment were a strange combination of emptiness and relief. Every sound in the old house, her laugh, the creak of the floors, even the microwave beep, had haunted me. Here, the walls were bare, the echo of my own footsteps the only constant. I spent long hours unpacking boxes I had avoided for months, each item a memory I had once shared and now had to confront alone. The plant I brought with me thrived on the windowsill, stubborn and green, a reminder that life persists even in unexpected places. I began to understand that healing doesn't arrive in grand gestures but in the quiet rituals of daily survival. Cooking meals, washing clothes, folding towels the way I liked them, setting my coffee cup on the same spot each morning. I tried dadding once, tentatively. A coworker from a side job suggested lunch. I went out, smiled, listened, but every laugh echoed the wrong place. I realized the walls I had built around myself weren't just protection, they were necessity. I didn't want distraction. I didn't want pity. I wanted to reclaim the part of myself I had given away without realizing it. The betrayal had stripped me raw, but it had also left me with a lens that refused pretense. People asked if I was bitter. I said no. I was cautious. I was vigilant. I was awake. There was a difference. Work became my refuge. Every mission I had before had demanded focus, discipline, endurance. Now even civilian tasks carried weight because I measured them against what I had survived. I volunteered with a veteran support group, sharing my story selectively, feeling the power of words that warned, words that could prepare someone else for distance, for sacrifice, for heartbreak. I spoke at gatherings about trust, about loyalty, about the silent battles fought not on foreign soil but in the hearts of those left behind. Faces in the crowd reflected understanding, fear, recognition. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, that the experience was part of a wider narrative no one talks about until it's too late. Occasionally, I heard news about her. Mutual friends mentioned she had moved again, now dating someone else openly. Social media told the rest. Photos of dinners, vacations, smiles that felt manufactured for an audience. I felt a spike of anger at first, but it dulled quickly, replaced by a neutral acceptance. I couldn't control her choices, and that realization, bitter as it was, carried a weightless freedom. I had been chained to expectation, to what should happen, to the narrative I believed was ours. Letting it go was like unclenching a fist I hadn't noticed I'd been gripping. Sleep returned gradually. At first I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the ghosts of my marriage alive in every shadow. Over time, the nightmares lessened. I started writing again, words flowing onto pages in bursts of honesty I hadn't dared before. I wrote letters to no one, memoirs for myself, journaling the moments that defined me, the desert nights, the camaraderie, the betrayal, the solitude, the clarity. Each word was an affirmation that I still existed outside the story someone else had tried to rewrite. One rainy evening, I returned from a long walk to find a stray dog outside my building. Muddy, thin, and shaking, it looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes. I knelt, offered it a piece of bread, and it followed me inside. Nomming it Max, I realized I was capable of nurturing again. The loyalty of another being, untainted by betrayal, was healing in its own quiet way. Max slept by my side at night, his soft breathing a steady rhythm, and I found comfort in it. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace, a reclaiming of home within myself. Then a letter arrived. Not the polite closure of the first, but one addressed to me with the faint handwriting I recognized instantly. She wrote of regret, apologies, attempts at reconciliation that had come too late. She asked if we could talk. I read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in the top drawer of my dresser. I didn't respond. I realized that forgiveness was not the same as returning. Forgiveness could live inside me without inviting someone else back into my life. It was a gift I gave myself, not her. Life moved forward in uneven steps. I started small, joining a local gym, meeting neighbors, reconnecting with family. Friends I had taken for granted came back into my life when I allowed them. I traveled to places I had always postponed, sometimes alone, sometimes with companions who needed nothing from me but presence. The experiences were raw, unfiltered. They were mine. And slowly, in this reclaimed space, I remembered the man I had been before betrayal. Not naive, not blindly trusting, but strong, deliberate, unbreakable in ways that distance and heartbreak had forged. Months turned to a year. The anniversary of my deployment came and went quietly. I stood at a memorial service, among soldiers and families, feeling the weight of absence differently. I remembered who I had been when I left, who I had returned as, and who I had chosen to become. That evening, I returned to my apartment, the faint smell of rain still lingering in the air. Max ran ahead to greet me. I poured coffee, sat at the table, and wrote a line that would eventually become the first paragraph of my memoir. I served my country, but the hardest service was learning to serve myself after someone else claimed my life in my absence. Rebuilding didn't mean forgetting. It meant understanding. Betrayal was no longer a wound, but a lesson etched into my bones. I knew what loyalty truly demanded, what trust required, and what boundaries I could never compromise again. I also learned that courage doesn't always manifest on a battlefield. It exists in the quiet insistence of reclaiming your life, of walking away from the story someone else tried to write over your own. In the end, I sold the old house. The walls that had witnessed disloyalty, the floors that had echoed deceit, the doors that had opened to strangers, I let them go. It was not surrender, it was liberation. The money went toward a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, a place I could fill with things I chose, art I loved, furniture that felt like me, shelves stacked with memories I wanted to keep. I planted flowers outside, their colors defiantly bright, and for the first time in years I felt at home not in a building, but in the choices I made.